The House will come to order. This morning, the morning pledge will be said by Clayton Melster, who's homeschooled from Pueblo, Colorado, guest of Representative Donald Valdez.
Please join us in saying the pledge. Put your hand over it. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Randall, please call the roll.
Representatives Arndt, Baisley, Beckman, Benavides, Byrd, Bockenfeld, Buck, Buckner, Buenteo, Caraveo, Carver, Catlin, Coleman, Cutter, Duran, Escar, Exum, Froelich, Galindo, Garnett, Representative Garnett,
Excused.
Geithner, Gonzalez Gutierrez, Gray, Hanson, Harrod, Hooten, Humphrey,
Excused.
Representative Garnett is present. Jackson,
Excused.
Marquez Lewis,
James.
Kennedy, Kip, Representative Humphrey is present. Kraft Tharp,
Very much.
Landgraf, Larson, Lewis, Liston, Lontine, McCluskey,
Excused.
Representative McCluskey is present. McKean, McLaughlin, Melton, Michelson Janae, Mollica, Neville, Pelton, Ransom, Rich, Roberts, Sane, Sandridge, Singer, Sirota, Snyder, Soper, Sullivan, Tipper, Tatone, Valdez A, Valdez D, Van Winkle, Weissman, Williams, Wilson. Madam Speaker.
Here. Okay, thank you. With 61 aye votes, 3 excused, and 1 vacant, we have a quorum. Representative Galindo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the reading of the Journal of Thursday, February 28th be dispensed with and approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No! The amendment passes. The motion passes. Announcements and introductions. Representative Singer and McLaughlin.
Nope, they called on you. You're good.
Oh, did she? Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're going to needle you a little bit today.
Just in case you didn't hear our point last time, the Acupuncture Association of Colorado will be meeting Monday, March 4th. My favorite military command as well.
And we're going to be over at the Scottish Rite Masonic Center for a lunch, and I want you to learn all about the great art of acupuncture and meet some really, really wonderful people.
And in case you can't make it for lunch, we will be starting at 8 a.m. with a light breakfast at the Capitol basement by the committee rooms, and also convening in House Committee Room 112, so feel free to send your aides and interns to Room 112 at 8:45 a.m., bright and early on Monday, to talk about how we can better take care of the health of our constituents. Thank you.
We have made our point. Thank you.
Representative Herod.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm looking for Representative Carver. I don't see her. There she is. Hi, Representative Carver. I just want to get your attention specifically because today we are talking about an issue that you really care about, which is mental health and its impact on the jails. And we will be having a lunch and learn. And yes, Minority Leader Neville said that we will have a lunch break. So everyone who wants to come over for lunch to learn more about how mental health and addiction is impacting our jails, we'll have a lunch meeting with Equitas. We'll be hosting. It will be over in 603. Definitely hope that you can make it. It's an issue that will be in front of this General Assembly, and we will be debating at length, not only in the long bill, but in further bills that will be coming forward. So hope to see you there. Thanks.
Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today's a special day. I have my oldest daughter and her husband, James, and their kids. 3 of my grandkids are here, off on the side, so thank you.
Representative Kipp.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to let you guys all know that many of your locally elected school board members are going to be visiting you on the House floor this morning, so please make them welcome. We have 2 of them already over in the corner, including the person who was just appointed last week to replace me. So, guys, wave, and please make them feel welcome today. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, you've heard it sort of alluded to today, but just a heads up that we will debate second reading up until noon, and we'll break for lunch unless you're on public health, and then public health will meet, and then we'll reconvene most likely between 1 and 1:30 right after public health is done. Cool, I just want to make sure I made that announcement.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was in this well talking about the town of Hayden yesterday, and the town of Hayden came to the House today. I'd like to welcome school board member Tammy Delaney and her daughter to the House floor.
Representative Valdez.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to serve with you.
It's an honor to serve with you, Representative.
And happy March 1st. Members, with us today we have school board members Lori Espinosa and her daughter Randy, all the way from Centennial School in the first city where Colorado began. Do you guys know where Colorado began? I heard San Luis, that's right. Also with us we have school board member Dwight Mondragon with us. And with that, all the way from Alamosa, we have the mayor of Alamosa, Ty Coleman, with us. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I would like to let you know that my amazing, awesome mom, Connie Mohal, is joining us today as my guest. Please welcome her.
Representative Carver. Ann Geithner. Please,
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We want to let our colleagues know that we are joined this morning by school board members from School District 20, one of the premier school districts, not just in El Paso County, but in the state. So, school board members, would you stand, please?
Any other announcements or introductions? Minority Leader Neville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I request a moment of personal privilege.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, it was brought to my attention yesterday that one of my members was accused of impugning someone's motives. I reviewed the tape. I didn't find that to be true. And I certainly hope that that wasn't an accusation made so that we can stifle debate here on the floor. But it did remind me that over the years, the decorum in this body has deteriorated. And that's not either side of the aisle, it's both sides of the aisle. And I just want to take this as a lesson learned that we should remember our time here is temporary. And this institution will outlast us. If you need any reminders when you're going and getting a cup of coffee, just look at those photos. All those people are long and gone, but this institution is still here. So I'm issuing a call to action to all of us to represent this body as best as we can and to help get the decorum back to where it needs to be in this body. And I thought it was timely because we do debate some heavy issues. We're going to be debating some heavy issues today, but we should all remember that this body is bigger than all of us. Thank you.
Further announcements, Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members with us this morning that gave us the pledge was Clayton Melster. He's 18 years old from San Luis, Colorado, and he has polymicrogyra. It's a condition that affects the development of a human brain. He was born this way. You know, when I met him this morning, his eyes were wide open, looking at every corner of the Capitol. He hears you, he sees you. When I asked him if he would like to give the pledge this morning, I just heard the enthusiastic, not only from his parents, but from him. It's a true honor to have him here in the house with us today. In the House of Representatives here in the state of Colorado, Clayton. That's right. Hi, Clayton. How are you today? I just wanted to let you know the General Assembly and the House of Representatives honor you and thank you in so many ways for being here. Truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, Clayton. Representative Buckner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a special guest in the House today. It's my minister, Reverend Eugene Downing from New Hope Baptist Church. My church is my rock. My church is supportive, and I'm so excited that my pastor is here today. Could you please stand, Reverend Downing?
Representative Liston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I know it's School Board Day today, and I wanted to give a shout out to the members of School District 11 from Colorado Springs. I don't even know if they're here or not, but everyone else has given a shout out to their school district. So to the board members of School District 11, if you're not here, that's okay. We'll just say hello to you anyways. Thank you.
Representative Sane.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to come up here and thank the taxpayers today, because every day is Taxpayer Appreciation Day.
Representative Van Winkle.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, as you'll see on your desk, there's a flyer that says, "Keep calm, we're halfway there." The second annual Downhill Party will be on Monday, March 4th from 5 to 7 p.m. at 225 East 16th Avenue. It is hosted by the Caro Cable Telecommunications Association and Charter Communications. I hope you'll be able to join both of them Monday evening there. Thank you, members.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just come here again to introduce another school district. We do have D38. I'm about to bring them into the chamber, and they'll be sitting over here. If we could just recognize the members from D38 School Board. Tiffany Upchurch is here, along with a few others. So thank you, D38, for being a part of or being with us today.
Representative Galindo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And since everyone else is doing it, I want to recognize the District 6 school board members we have in the gallery. Greeley's in the house. And come on down, and you guys can sit in on the debate.
Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One other note. Also with us here today is the Colorado Ag Leadership. If some of you members have also seen that they've been knocking at your office, some by your office, knocking on your doors, maybe asking you questions. They're doing a tour around the Capitol. Not only asking questions about ag, asking questions about policy, asking questions about economic development, sustainability, growth. Did I say education? Education. Questions in all different realms. With that, I thank them for being here and continue asking the questions about ag, because it's important to know where your food comes from. What resources are used to produce your food, especially our water, our soils, especially those that harvest our crops. Those individuals are going to be the next generation of farmers and ranchers. Those are the individuals going to continue to grow. You know why? Because we need that next generation to continue to produce food for everyone in the world. And as the population continues to grow, our ag slowly is declining, with the fastest growing commodity out there. Anybody know what that is? Subdivisions. My colleague from El Paso County, that's subdivisions. And with that, we need a lot of individuals like you to continue to move Colorado forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any other announcements and introductions? Members, we have one item of business as the House before we proceed to second readings. Mr. Randall, we have, is it 128? Danae, you need to. Please read the title of Senate Bill 128.
Senate Bill 128 by Senators Moreno and Todd, also Representatives Esgar and McLaughlin, concerning adjustments to appropriations for the 2018-19 fiscal year for the state share of total program funding for school finance in connection therewith making and reducing appropriations.
Representative Esgar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I'm simply asking permission for the conference committee on this bill to be able to go beyond the scope.
Representative Esgar, can you explain? This is the first time we've done this. Do you want to explain?
Sure. So a conference committee was determined to, Senate Bill 128 was the school finance bill that we voted on during supplementals. We amended it. The Senate decided that they wanted us to go to a conference committee. A conference committee has been issued. However, they asked that the conference committee go beyond the scope, and we did not include that in our conversation in the House. So I'm here right now in front of you to ask you for permission to go beyond the scope in the conference committee to work on the amendment that was put on the bill.
Members, this is a recorded vote. Please return to your seats to vote. The question before the House is a request for the Conference Committee on Senate Bill 128 to go beyond the scope of the differences between the House and the Senate. Oh, it's not a recorded vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. No. The motion is passed. Majority Leader Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to proceed out of order for consideration of second reading of bills, general orders.
Seeing no objection, the House will proceed out of order to second reading of bills, general orders. Representative Melton. You have heard the motion. Seeing no objection, Representative Melton will take the chair.
The committee will come to order. With your unanimous consent, the bills will be read by title unless there's a request of having a bill read at length. Committee amendments will not be read unless requested, as they are printed in your bill folders. Floor amendments will be shown on the screen and on your iPads and will not be read unless requested. Bills will be laid over upon motion of the majority leader, and the court rule is relaxed. Mr. Randall, please read the title, House Bill 1131.
House Bill 1131 by Representatives Hawkes Lewis, all Senator Winter, concerning a requirement to share the wholesale acquisition cost of a drug when sharing information concerning the drug with another party.
Representative Hawkes Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's an honor to serve with you today.
And it is an honor to serve with you.
I move House Bill 1131 and the Health and Insurance Committee report.
To the Health
And Mr. Chair, I do have an amendment to the committee report, so I move Amendment L011.
That amendment has been moved and is properly displayed. To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have worked with our colleagues and pharma stakeholders and Representative Buckner to fine-tune some of the language. We have injected stat for my medical colleagues in the room, some definitions around prescription drug marketing. And with these additions, we ask for a yes vote on the amendment. And actually, before we do that, I would like to bring Representative Buckner to speak about the amendment.
Representative Buckner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate Representative Jaquez Lewis in her ability to work with us. I voted no on this bill because I used to be in the pharma business, and I felt that this change with the amendment would make it more acceptable to all of those who are in the field of pharmaceutical sales. I appreciate the fact that Representative Jaquez Lewis was so willing to work with us and make the changes to the wording that would make this a more effective bill. So with that, I will be changing my vote to yes for this bill.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L001? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of Amendment L001. L011. Excuse me. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. L011 is adopted stat.
Stat.
To the committee report, Representative Jaquez Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We've all heard about the high cost of prescription drugs on our campaign trail, and this is the first bill in the General Assembly that works with physicians and prescribers to potentially lower the cost of prescription drugs. So we ask for a yes vote on this bill.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We heard good testimony on this bill in committee, but I would ask for a no vote on House Bill 1131.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop you. We're still on the committee report.
Oh, okay. On the committee report, we had good testimony on the committee report in the committee. My concern was that this amendment and the committee report, what we have here in this bill, doesn't provide us enough transparency for the consumer, and so I would ask for a no vote on the committee report.
Is there any further discussion on the Health Insurance Committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of the committee report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee report is adopted. To the bill, Representative Jaquez Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We basically have given a new way of getting information to prescribers in Colorado. This will help them make a complete decision on therapeutic options, so I ask for a yes vote on this bill.
Sir, Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the bill, I would ask for a no vote on 1131. Even though there was some good intent in some of the testimony, once again, under the umbrella of transparency, we are adding more red tape and actually making things less transparent. This has nothing to do with the consumer. This has nothing to do with the person who is paying for the drugs or the insurance company, what they're reimbursing for the drugs. Once again, we leave those who live in Colorado without the opportunity to know what anything costs, their prescription drugs, their office visit, the visit to the hospital. They're just in the dark. They don't know what anything is going to cost. What this does do, it sets up a relationship between the doctor and the pharmaceutical vendor. In the past, those relationships have been very, very concerning because of rebates that don't go directly to the consumer. I know that there was good intent in this bill. My concern is that the more that we hide what something actually costs to the consumer, the farther away we get from transparency. This only includes wholesalers. It doesn't, the wholesalers, the cost of the drug. It doesn't include retailers or pharmacy manufacturers or pharmacy managers. It doesn't include the rebates that health insurance companies get that never go to the consumer. This actually will cause less transparency. I know that we talk about transparency a lot in these chambers, and I can tell that everyone is very concerned about it because they are so intently listening in the chambers about how important it is that people understand how much their health care is going to cost. But since we are driving more and more away from giving individuals in Colorado the opportunity to manage and control their health care, and moving more and more to a state health care system in which your choices will not be given to you, this bill actually buries transparency. I would ask for a no vote and, vote no.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1131? Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, we need to vote against this bill. This is classic government overreach. This requires that the salesperson coming from a pharmaceutical company trying to inform a doctor or a hospital about a new drug also inform that doctor or hospital about all the other drugs that might compare and their pricing. So it is simply an imposition on business that is inappropriate for government to do. Compare that to where if you were buying a car and the salesperson is telling you about the Ford that they are representing and trying to sell you the Ford, but they also have to tell you about the Hyundai and the Kia and the Chevy and everything else. It is inappropriate for us to have that level of involvement in private industry. This is government overreach at the classic level, and I urge that we vote no on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Caraveo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a prescriber, I can tell you how important this bill is in creating transparency for the consumer and in lowering healthcare costs for all Coloradans. Unlike when you go and buy a car at a lot, your prescriber has a very large influence in what medication it is that you're going to be receiving. You know, as a doctor, I tend to decide which drug my patient is going to be on. And unfortunately, because it has not been emphasized in my medical training or in medicine overall, most of the time I don't know what that drug costs. And so what I think this bill will do, although it is not a perfect answer, you know, I think we're coming to the cost of healthcare piecemeal because it is such a complicated and large system, is that it's going to make your prescriber aware of the cost and aware of the cost of the drug that they're choosing over other similar drugs. That's something that as a doctor I have never thought of, and that honestly the pharmaceutical industry is not going to do without somebody putting it in statute. So as a prescriber, I would urge a yes vote on this bill because it starts to create some transparency and some awareness for the people that control the medicines that you're on as to what the cost is going to be. Thank you.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I will ask the sponsor to answer the question of, if the doctors know what the drug costs, are they going to tell the patient? Is it the patient's right to know what a drug is going to cost them? Even though a doctor would know what the wholesale cost is, that isn't what the true cost will be when they go to the pharmacy, because they have no way of knowing what the insurance covers, and that may be different depending on where someone lives in Colorado, and what the pharmacy is going to charge. My concern with this is it's focusing on one piece of a very complex chain of drug cost. Wholesale, resale, manufacturing, the pharmacy management rebates, those are where some of the big dollars are spent. And yet when it's all said and done and all this additional requirement is put on one small part of the chain, the consumer will still not know. They aren't making the decision because of cost. The doctor is. So for me, with all of these healthcare transparency bills, which have been promised for years that it's going to make things cheaper, in this chamber, we've been promising for years that you'll have more transparent healthcare, that you'll have more choices, that it'll be cheaper, better, and it isn't. This is very concerning to me because it is one piece of a very complex chain, and it doesn't help the consumer. Other people are making decisions on your behalf, and you deserve to know how much it's going to cost when you go to the pharmacy. You deserve real price transparency, and that only comes to the consumer. Like when you go to Target or Walmart, when you buy something, you know what it's going to cost. When you go to the doctor or the hospital or the clinic, you don't. This is not going to help. This buries once again and puts other people in charge of your health care. I would ask for a no.
Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is yet another attempt by government to solve a problem that government created in the first place. We keep going in the back door trying to resolve the cost of health care through transparency, one little cut at a time, and it simply adds cost all along the supply chain. We rely on doctors to be informed on all of the options that they are going to prescribe to the patient. We should not be relying on the salesperson for the pharmaceutical company to inform the doctor of what the doctor needs to know by his or her profession, nor the hospital. This is classic government overreach. It does not solve the problem. It only piles on one more rock on top of all of us that are trying to hold up under the healthcare problem, the healthcare monstrosity that's been created in partnership between government and insurance industries. This is not the right solution. I urge strongly a no vote on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any further discussion on House Bill 1131? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 31. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 1131 is adopted. Mr. Randall, please read the title of House Bill 1004.
House Bill 1004 by Representatives Roberts and Callan, all Senator Donovan, considering a proposal for implementing competitive state option for more affordable health care coverage in Colorado in connection with requesting authorization to use existing federal money for the proposed state option and taking other actions toward the implementation of that state option.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1004, the Health and Insurance Committee report and the Appropriations Committee report.
To the Appropriations Committee report.
In the Appropriations Committee, we added an appropriation. I'd ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Appropriation Committee report is adopted. To the Health and Insurance report. Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the Health and Insurance Committee, we added a few technical amendments. One, to change the date of when the report is due back to the legislature, and a few other technical and renumbering amendments. I ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on the Health and Insurance Committee report? Seeing none, the question is the adoption of the Health and Insurance Committee report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. To the Health Insurance Committee report is adopted. To the bill, Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we talk about the bill, I would like to move L003 and ask that it be displayed.
Give us just 1 second while that is taking place. Amendment L003 is moved and is properly displayed. To the amendment, Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment just makes clear some more direction to the departments on when they are studying this proposal to look at the impact of a select group of consumers, the ones that are receiving these tax credits, and make sure and determine whether they would be affected if this plan were ever put in place. I'd ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L003? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L003. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Amendment L003 is adopted. To the bill. Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I'm proud to bring House Bill 10004 with Representative Catlin here. As you know, the cost of health insurance, especially on the western slope, but in all of Colorado, continue to skyrocket. What we have in front of you is a reasoned, smart approach at looking at how to possibly bring more competition into the market. There are 14 counties in Colorado that only have one option on the individual market. This asks the departments to come up with a proposal, present it back to us, and then we get to weigh in on whether we move forward. I think competition is a good thing for everybody. It will bring down prices for our constituents and all of your constituents. I'd ask for an aye vote.
Representative Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to serve with you.
It's an honor to serve with you, sir.
You might wonder why I'm here. The biggest reason that I'm here is in my district. 4 counties are in that 14-county count that only have one insurance company. The only competition we've got out there is to see how fast we can raise the bill. This is an opportunity for us in the state of Colorado to study what a public option might look like, what it would cost, what would be involved, can it work, will it work? You know, I like the idea of studying something before we just jump off the edge of the pool and try to sink or swim. I think this bill will allow that to happen. And there are some things in here that create stops to where we can check. After the study committee is appointed, then we do the study. I think it's in November of 19. They bring that study back to the joint health committees. We look at it, we start to see, will it work? Could it work? Might it work? I don't want to get to the point we have blinders on that this just simply becomes single payer, and I don't think this bill will do that. I'm old enough to remember a product called Cover Colorado. Cover Colorado was for people who could not buy insurance for whatever reason it was. I remember that product because my brother couldn't buy insurance in other places. So he was on Cover Colorado. That product saved his farm twice. If he hadn't had that, he wouldn't have been on a farm because he would have had to cash the farm out in order to pay some of those bills. I'm hoping that with this study, those are the kind of things that we look at. I don't want to get on a single railroad track and head out thinking we already know where we're going. And I don't think that's going to happen with this bill. I think we're going to take the time to look at, would something like Cover Colorado work? Does it have any potential? You know, on the western slope of Colorado, particularly in my district, I've got people that are having to make up their mind whether they're going to pay their insurance bill or pay their mortgage that month. Members, that's not where we want our citizens to be. The quality of life in Colorado is something that attracts people. You and I know it. We live here. We represent it. It's hard to enjoy the quality of life in Colorado if you can't afford health insurance, or if you decide that you're going to have to drop it. I have an instance in my community, not in my community, but in my district, where the young dad had to drop himself off of insurance so that he could afford to insure his wife and daughter. That's not working. He's the major breadwinner, but he steps out of the insurance so that his wife and baby have it. What happens if he gets hurt? So I want you to vote yes on this bill. I want you to think about it. I want you to think about what's the Colorado that you have in mind. You know, on this side of the mountain, you folks have so many choices, it's incredible. 6, 7, 8, 10 different insurance companies. You can hop around, get what you need, and it works. But it's not working in rural Colorado. I'm more familiar with western Colorado, but I'm hearing these same stories from my rural cousins out on the eastern plains. Members, somebody needed to do something. That's the reason that I'm on this bill. Thank you. I'd appreciate a yes vote.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few years ago, with the introduction of Obamacare, I heard the word somebody had to do something. And I've seen our health insurance rate, not only in the rural communities, but in my community. I have single mothers that are working. I've been on the exchange. I've spent time looking about what an insurance policy would cost a 43-year-old with 2 children making $43,000 in Arapahoe County compared to rural Colorado. And honestly, I don't see that the cost is that much different. They're all high. The exchange is like a big monopoly. All the insurance plans, even if you have 5, they all have a $5,000 or $6,000 deductible. We have failed people in this country, and we have failed the middle class and small businesses in Colorado with these insurance costs. And it is not only in the rural communities. So I stand in opposition to this bill for some concerns that I have. Not that I want to have blinders on, but I'm very concerned about a $571 million study that actually $1,000 study that actually, $500,000, thank you. Okay, thank you. $500,000 study that actually, I know we could pay for a lot of insurance. Thank you, Representative Roberts, that actually puts us on a fast track for a state plan. If you look at the bill, it actually requires that a state option for health care coverage that uses existing state health care infrastructure be looked at. But it also looks at the State Department taking over these plans. And my concern is that Colorado voted against single payer a few years ago by significant numbers. So what it actually says, now I found it, a state option for health care coverage that uses existing health care infrastructure, and the study will determine whether the state option should be offered through the State Department. Now, what does that mean? We've had that discussion. We've turned that bill down. What it will do is integrate these options into our state health care insurance premiums, and that will raise increased costs for our state employees. There's a lot of things in this study that are concerning to me, but the biggest thing that concerns me is that it doesn't come back to the legislature to be acted upon. It goes to the SMART Act hearing, which is an interim hearing where sometimes people are available and sometimes they're not. And then to stop anything in this study that has been identified as going to be implemented in the next budget year, you actually have to have legislation. So we are on a fast track to doing something. Once this study is funded, those decisions will be made, and it will be very difficult if something comes up that the legislature wants to stop to have that happen. It does seem like we're on a pretty fast track to single payer in Colorado. And that's not being paranoid. That's what people are saying in leadership in this chamber and in the governor's office. And so I'm concerned that says it's a study. I want inexpensive options for people in my district also. I don't want small businesses to have to pay such high premiums. I want them to have good health care. I just don't think this is the way to blindly let a vendor, who I bet has already been chosen, but a vendor, design a health care plan and then implement it without the public understanding what those impacts would be. I ask for a no vote.
Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It has long been a goal of social engineers to take over this most intimate area of our lives, our health care. It's been a slow creep, but if you recall, even in the 70s, even in the early 80s, there was not much in complaining about the cost of health insurance. We all bragged about having the best in the world, the finest health care in the world, and it was not an issue that we were overburdening with cost. Then there was a move to the HMO model, where monopolies began to be developed and partnerships with insurance and healthcare providers began to come together. That became even a bigger target and attraction for government. Government now has got its arms so far around us, and this is yet another creep into a government plan. The ACA, the Affordable Health Care Act, did not give everyone coverage. It kicked off tens of thousands of Coloradoans. This is a displacement of market forces with government effort. And this is yet another rock on top of the pile, and we need to resist this. We need to pursue what is natural in free enterprise. Healthcare is no different than anything else except that it's very intimate to us. But we need to take advantage of the market forces that keep costs down and keep the natural forces of people doing great things for other people in return for a fair compensation. Government involvement just tacks on costs on top of that and gets in the way, frustrates customers that need health care and they can't get it because of bureaucracy. We need to not go down this path. I urge you strongly to vote no on this bill, with all due respect to my fellow colleague from the Western Slope.
Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the bill sponsors for bringing House Bill 1008. In the bill, it talks about development submittal for proposal to certain committees in the General Assembly. It talks about the experts, bringing the private health insurance experts, consumers, consumer advocates, employers, providers, and carriers to the table. This bill comes together to find a solution. This bill is a need for Colorado, especially in rural Colorado, a place where I call home, whether it be in San Luis, where Clayton lives, where the nearest hospital is about a 50-minute drive. You know, I'm lucky to have a hospital in my hometown of La Jara, where I was born. A couple years ago, it was about to shut down. Healthcare is a huge need in all of rural Colorado. There's individuals who do not have the access and quality of care that they need. Our seniors, our youth, everybody in between. This bill brings individuals together to find a solution. With that, I ask for an aye vote, and thank you for the bill sponsor bringing it.
Representative Baisley. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my colleague from the southern counties is right, of course, about calling together a study of experts who could inform this body on where to go next. But the intent very explicitly is not to come up with market force, a free market solution, but very explicitly is to come up with a state solution, a state option. That is not where we should ever go with something, a service provision for consumers in the state of Colorado. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Valdez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, my colleague. It does find a solution for the state of Colorado. This bill brings individuals from all over to the table. And at that end of that deadline, if we don't find a solution, we'll continue working for one. Thank you.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Representative Catlin and I are up here to do right by our constituents. We do have the best health care in the world, but we don't have, many people in our districts and across Colorado don't have access to that healthcare system. This is about using market forces to allow people to purchase an option where there is no competition. The market forces in our area have led to a monopoly in 14 counties. We deserve to give them more choice. This is a reasonable approach to study how to do that, present proposals back to the legislature in a fiscally responsible way. I'd ask for an aye vote.
Representative McKean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Roberts. And I would really like you to give the body a little more definition of how this process would work. Because I was sitting back there and I'd read the bill, and in my first reading, I felt like, this is a study. It's going to come back and it's going to say, here are some of the options. But then if I look toward the end of the bill, it's not really giving me the ability to then, as a body, go back and draft bills to create this. What it really is saying is the proposal submitted to the committees of the General Assembly pursuant to this section must include the detailed analysis of the proposed state option, the various methods for implementing the proposed state option, as well as any identified statutory or rule changes. Right after that, though, it says that they will prepare the waivers necessary to do this. So to me, that sort of begins a leapfrog effect that I would like to have either defined here or resist here, which is if what we are doing is creating a system by which they come back and say, here are the waivers required, and then on the next page it says, the preparation and submission of federal waivers must be delayed if a member of the General Assembly files a bill by the regular bill filing deadline. So then it makes me wonder, is the implementation of the proposal now not contingent on an approval of that proposal here, but rather someone filing a bill to either slow it down or stop it? Can you educate me to process?
Representative Roberts.
Thank you. Thanks to my friend from Larimer County. Yes, in the bill, thanks for reading the bill. In the bill it says if a member files a bill to change the proposal, we will change the proposal. This gives us a report back to the legislature. We may have to run new legislation to implement the bill. We may not, or if everybody's okay with the plan. But if you're not okay with the plan, you have every right to file a bill. That's why the report's due back before the bill filing deadline of next session.
Representative McKean.
Thank you, and thank you for that explanation. And let me put a little parentheses in here. I live along the Northern Front Range, and because of the insurance districts that we have in the state, because of the risk pools that we have and the proximity to care, we have lower health care coverage and more options than you do. I was initially in support of this because I want you to have that kind of ability. I also think maybe getting rid of our insurance districts would help and allow companies to develop their risk pools on their own, but that's a whole other issue. So my question, I think, truly is this, that this does deviate from our study, then a proposal, and a bill to enact. It seems that way to me because really what you're saying is a study, the proposal comes, and if somebody doesn't like the proposal, then they file a bill to alter or stop that. That was what I heard you just say. Tell me I'm wrong. And you can just say it, you're wrong.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Representative, for your questions. This is not unlike studies that this legislature has asked for on a variety of topics. We're asking the departments who deal with this issue to come up with a proposal, present it back to the legislature. We get to weigh in as a legislative body as how do we move forward next.
Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment L004 and ask that it be displayed.
The amendment is moved and is properly displayed to the amendment. Representative Beckman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of my concerns about this bill was that a consultant would be hired to put together a state plan, and it would be implemented in a very quick process without the legislature being able to weigh in except for through a SMART committee or a hearing where the plan would be described and then the costs would be given at that time. It's important to have a fiscal note. It's important to understand how this would impact other districts. If we are going to single payer, it would be important to understand what impacts that is going to be on all of the people of Colorado. So this amendment is a short amendment, I think, that would really help with transparency and also allow people from other districts and the entire state of Colorado to actually see and debate the merits of what this study is saying. I understand that there is a monopoly. There's a lot of reasons because of the complexity of what we have in Colorado that insurance companies are leaving. But this moves to a state plan, a state-run plan, which is also a monopoly. So this would actually allow the General Assembly, those people who were elected by regions and districts, to debate and vote on the merits of this study. And upon the passage of the bill, which could be implemented, it could be the first bill of this session. We could hear it in committee. We could hear it in 3 days. At least there would be some transparency for the good people of Colorado who have been so negatively impacted by what the government has done to health care. Year after year, they make commitments and promises that your costs will go down. And they implement more regulations and measures of transparency. But we don't save money, and there's no transparency. And for this big of a change to implement a state plan, I think that we have to have the vote of the House and the Senate. I would ask for an aye vote.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I'd ask for a no vote. The provisions of this legislative authority to file a bill, any member can file a bill to change the proposal, already is contained on the very next page on page 7. What this would do would delay the entire process by a whole nother year, which is a whole nother year that all of your constituents don't have more competition in the marketplace. I'd ask for a no vote.
See, Representative Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things I'd like to remind you folks about, it's not going to be good politics on anybody's part to leapfrog this study with something that they think might be better. Because this needs the opportunity, it needs the time, the function of the study to see what it could look like and what it might cost. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to take the opportunity to study, and at the end of this period of time, then we decide what the state of Colorado wants to do in the next legislative session. I ask for a yes vote.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The noes have it. Amendment L004 is lost. To the bill. Seeing no further discussion on House Bill 10004, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The ayes have it. House Bill 10004 is passed. Mr. Randall, please read the title to Senate Bill 71.
Senate Bill 71 by Senator Fields, also Representative Roberts, concerning expanding the admission of out-of-court statements of a child.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 71, and there is no committee report.
To the bill.
Members, this bill expands the out-of-court statements that can be admissible in court after review of a judge to help our child victims have more voice in the courtroom, to have more reliable evidence in the courtroom for both sides of the courtroom. I'd ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 71? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 71. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 71 is adopted. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over Senate Bill 32 till the end of the second reading calendar.
Senate Bill 32 will be laid over as per the Majority Leader's request. Mr. Randall, Mr. Majority Leader. Okay. Mr. Randall, please read the title to House Bill 1177.
House Bill 1177 by Representatives Sullivan and Garnett, also Senators Court and Pedersen, concerning creation of an extreme risk protection order.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I move the Appropriations Committee report, the Judiciary Committee report, and House Bill 1177.
To the Appropriations Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before we get to the committee report, members, I want to thank Minority Leader Neville for his comments this morning regarding debate in the well and the decorum of the House. This is, 1177 is an issue that I personally care a lot about. I know many of you personally care a lot about. And, even though in my mind, I believe we're going to be giving something back to society and not taking something away, and by that mean that this bill can give somebody a second chance. I know that there are people who don't agree with that. And so I hope today we can have a debate that is very respectful of everyone's views. And with that, I would urge an aye vote on the Appropriations Committee report. We just added an appropriations clause.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Majority Leader, and concur with the Minority Leader as well. And as Chair, will ask that people can keep the decorum during this debate. With that, members, is there any further discussion on the Appropriations Committee report? Seeing none, the question is the adoption of the Appropriations Committee report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The Appropriations Committee report is adopted. To the Judiciary Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, we made a lot of changes in the Judiciary Committee report, many of which were from people who don't necessarily agree with House Bill 1177. And so we made sure we added some more information that can be collected and report data that can be reported back to the legislature so that we have a better understanding of whether or not how the extreme risk protection order is functioning with the courts. It also makes sure that it clearly identifies a really important point, which is that we will provide counsel to the respondent in the full hearing and hearings going forward, which no other state in the country has done. And I think when it comes to due process is a really important point. And we made sure that the process was clear for when the order either is terminated or expires, that there's a clear process for somebody to get their property back. And so we added that the property must be given back within 3 days. And we added language to really strengthen the expungement of records so that once this order is over, that the records are clear. With that, I would move an amendment to the committee report L016 and ask that it be displayed.
Amendment L016 is moved and is properly displayed. To the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, this is again from working with one person that somebody you guys probably know really well, Dave Kopel, who is a Second Amendment expert who was appointed to the Uniform Law Commission to discuss extreme risk protection orders. Somebody who I don't actually agree with very much, but is very thoughtful and very smart and had some constructive thoughts. And so what this would do is make sure that the termination hearing is within 14 days, that there is this is not a permanent federal ban. We want to make sure that this is only operating within the order in the state of Colorado, that this is not going to apply to a federal ban. And other than that, there's just some cleanup language from working with the judicial branch to make sure that this can be implemented properly, and I would urge an aye vote.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move L030 as a substitute amendment.
Please give us one moment. We are looking for distribution of that amendment. Thank you. Amendment L030 is moved and is properly displayed. To the amendment, Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this amendment is meant to be bipartisan. It achieves the aims that we are all concerned about in a way that should be constitutionally satisfying. First, it ensures that people who are most familiar with the troubled individual can make a report to law enforcement that will be listened to, and it offers real hope for saving lives. Second, it ensures that a mentally ill person is noticed, treated, and protected quickly without creating a secret hearing or damaging notifications that will have the effect of isolating or demoralizing an individual. Third, it requires action by law enforcement to be taken without delay. Fourth, it guarantees that our American tradition of fairness under the law is upheld by requiring that the person threatened and the person accused of being a threat are both heard, and both heard quickly. It builds in protections against personal vendettas or governmental overreach. And then sixth, it takes bad and threatening behavior seriously. At the same time, it ensures that the average citizens, whether or not they suffer from mental illness, will not be deprived of important rights like personal freedom, a speedy resolution of an issue, the right to defend oneself against false accusations, and the right to be judged fairly under the law. I think this is a way that we can actually solve this problem in a bipartisan way, and I urge a yes vote on L030.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. You know, I feel like so I would urge a no vote on this amendment, but I appreciate the conversation, and I think it's an important one. And I think the work that we put in, Representative Sullivan and I and the stakeholders, has been extensive to make sure that there is enough due process for the respondent, that the respondent has an attorney, that this process is going to work with the courts, that we have full evidentiary hearings, and we have an opportunity to really help those in crisis. Again, members, this is about helping those who are in need, who need help moving through that period of crisis, and this shouldn't be a partisan issue. I totally agree with that. And I believe that through the time that we have put in to this, working with people who will be implementing an order such as this, that we should vote against this amendment and continue to look at the underlying bill for all of that work that we put into it. So I would urge a no vote.
Representative Carver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. And would just like to touch briefly on why this approach, I think, is not only more focused on the issues we are actually facing with regards to some of the violence we're seeing. We heard in judiciary about numerous instances where an individual was mentally ill, was spiraling down, and where the mental illness was increasing in severity. And yet the process that we currently had to do a M1 hold and require a mental health evaluation was not working. This amendment is trying to take that process and make it function as it was intended. And in the first instance, to get that individual mental health treatment to deal with the issues that that person is having, which may be posing a public safety risk or a risk of suicide. And so that is what this amendment is doing. It has provided that process and structure to build on what we have in Colorado law on the M1 hold and try and make this process work, because we heard in committee testimony that the current M1 process was not working. So I ask for a yes vote on this amendment.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Carver. I totally agree. The M1 hold is not working. We heard it over and over and over again. There's nobody in this chamber that believes that the M1 hold is working. There's nobody in this chamber that believes that, there isn't a mental health crisis across Colorado. But the issue that I have with this amendment is that you have an imminent danger threshold. And what we have learned, and especially learned in the tragic example of Deputy Zachary Parrish, and let me just touch on that for a moment. I was going to talk a little bit about this while we were to the bill, but I think it's just important to kind of lay out that, this bill came as a result of the tragic incident that happened in Douglas County. And it is pertinent to the discussion on this amendment because what we have now with the M1 hold is an imminent danger threshold. So what that means is what happened to Deputy Parrish could continue to still happen. And as you remember, because many of you are very familiar with that incident, law enforcement, the Lone Tree Police Department and the Douglas County Sheriff Department knew that Matthew Reel was a significant risk of hurting himself or someone else. They knew that for weeks. They knew it so much that on the night that Deputy Parrish came to a call to Matthew Reel's apartment, that there was a note in the database that he had made threatening statements to law enforcement. So they showed up with 4 deputies. 4 deputies showed up to just a normal call to Matthew Reel's apartment because they knew he was a significant risk. They were able to talk Matthew Reel down on the first stop at 2 a.m. But when they got called back at 5 a.m., Matthew Reel had entered essentially a mental health break, right? He had had the break, and he was in imminent danger. And at that point, Deputy Zachary Parrish decided to step in on the M1 hold. And here's the problem with this amendment is that the imminent danger threshold is still there. What we're trying to solve in 1177 is to put in a tool for law enforcement to use that's significant risk, right? That's right below imminent threat. Because had this been in place before Deputy Zachary Parrish showed up at 5 a.m., had they been able to use the significant risk threshold in this order weeks in advance, they would have been able to temporarily remove Matthew Reel's assault weapon, and they would have been able to, at 5 a.m., enter the apartment because he was an imminent threat at that point. He had triggered the M1 hold. They've been able to enter the apartment and take Matthew Reel into custody on the M1 hold. What we're trying to do is create a tool for law enforcement to protect themselves. Significant risk, not imminent threat. This is a really important distinction here. I agree that the M1 hold is broken. I agree that this body needs to take a look at the M1 hold. I think it's going to take a lot more than just adopting this amendment to solve that problem. So I would urge a no vote on this amendment.
Representative Carver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, those of you that heard the debate last year may recall that our outstanding nonpartisan staff did a background memo on the M1 hold. And for those of you who are wondering, it is number 17-38, issued in October 2017. You know what is so frustrating about this M1 process and why it wasn't used in the Matthew Reel's situation? Remember, this young man had been a young man of accomplishment. And then when he slowly deteriorated and moved from making kind of off-the-wall statements to being very delusional, to posting threats and posts about his mother, who he thought was, you know, some other person doing some criminal activity, and that she was a threat. And the posts got more and more bizarre until his mother was in fear of him. All this time, the mother is in contact with county officials trying to get help for her son, to no avail. Can you imagine how frightening and frustrating that is when you see a beloved family member deteriorating before your eyes, becoming fearful of that person, making the calls and getting no help? Here is what is so frustrating to me, members, and why I think this amendment helps make the M1 process work. And I am reading from the memo. This is current law, folks. A person is considered a danger to others if he or she poses a substantial risk of physical harm to another person. Okay, as evidenced by what? What's the trigger to get to an M1 hold, which should have been available on Matthew Reel much earlier in time, as evidenced by recent homicidal or violent behavior, or by evidence that others are reasonably fearful of such harm, as indicated by a recent overt act, attempt, or threat to commit harm. Colleagues, what I just read from current law exactly describes Matthew Reel's situation. He had made overt acts, attempts, or threats in his posts to Facebook, in his increasingly bizarre behavior, in his threats against his mom. Respectfully, because I know how difficult these cases are, when the mom called the sheriff to come do something, in my humble opinion, the M1 standard had been met, and he could have been taken into custody. Just because the person is relatively calm when you show up at the door does not mean the M1 standard has not been met. Do you have a recent overt act, attempt, or threat to commit harm? If the answer is yes, you could have done the M1 hold. So I don't know, they felt they couldn't, because when they showed up at the door, Matthew Reel was relatively calm. I don't know why they read the law that way. I don't know why they felt like their hands were tied. Because if they would have done the M1 hold then, we could have gotten young Matthew into treatment. We wouldn't have had the later incident where he was destabilized, had the gun, was frightened, and Detective Parrish was killed. So I firmly believe that we need to try and make this M1 system work. And I believe the foundation is there. What this amendment is trying to do is to give more structure, more functionality to that process so that our desperate family members have an effective process they can use to get help for their loved one and avoid these tragedies. Either tragedies that end in suicide many times, or tragedies that end with injury or death to others. And so, respectfully, I ask for a yes vote on this amendment. I think so many times it is in this circumstance of suicide and mental illness that we see these public safety threats, and I think addressing that in an effective way is good policy for Colorado and would increase safety and help these families, which are truly desperate, when they have a beloved member struggling with mental illness or suicide.
Representative McKean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment, and it goes to some of my concerns. I heard a joke yesterday about Judiciary Committee that when we have bills in front of Judiciary Committee, you know, it's kind of like being on Judiciary because we're all going to come down here and tell you what happened. But this does answer some of those concerns that I had in committee, partly because one of the most egregious parts of doing anything like what we talk about in an extreme risk protection order is when we have an action that either aggravates a situation or leaves it unresolved. And so I want you all to kind of take a step back from some of the rhetoric you're going to hear about this and actually think about what this mechanism looks like. So there is a claim made that someone is posing an imminent threat, that they have concerns about their, whether it's their mental stability, whether it's threats that they've made, whatever that might be. And then an ex parte hearing occurs where people say these are our concerns, and out of that hearing, let's say that this order is granted. Someone, our first responders more than likely, law enforcement, is told you need to go and serve this order. And that order means that you're going to go to that person's residence and you're going to try to seize the firearms that are there. There are a few things that we can discuss later about that process, but literally that's what's going on here. And you take the firearms and really you leave. Because as we've already heard a description, the M1 process is not this process, and that it is inherently flawed. Well, I would tell you that one of the inherent flaws is that we don't have a place to put people for their 72-hour holds. We all know that. Part of the mental health crisis is getting people the help they need. But I rise in support of this amendment because it actually really incorporates the mental health component of what we should be doing at that door in the first place, which is evaluating the person that we are there to see, making sure that, one, we deal with the issue at hand, of which the firearm is only a tool. The issue at hand, truly, folks, is that you have someone who is destabilized that is requiring some kind of an intervention. My greatest worry is that after this order is issued, after this order is executed, and the firearms, the tools by which you're worried that someone may commit an egregious act are seized, that we just leave. Law enforcement has done what they were required to do. And they leave, and someone in an aggravated state is left without the help that they truly need. Because in this, we do not address that fundamental component. This amendment is here, I think, mostly to say that these are intertwined. These are concerns that cannot be considered separately. And in fact, there has to be some component of a mental health evaluation in this process so that we can get people the help they need, so that we do not leave someone in an aggravated state and live under the fallacy that if we just take the tools, whatever tool that might be, in this instance it's firearms. If it weren't firearms, maybe it's a vehicle, maybe it's a knife, maybe it's something else. And we heard much testimony about, well, police officers know how to handle that. We're not just talking about harm to police officers. We are talking about the concern that people might be of harm to themselves or others. And so to me, to not have these two cojoined is just an enormous lapse in our desire to treat and to affect something positive out of what I think we'd all agree is just ultimately someone's worst day. So please support this amendment. This is the way that we make sure we wrap all of the things we need to around this issue.
Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, I'm glad we're having a conversation about mental health and maybe even the M1 statute. But I think the problem here is there is an utterly false dichotomy being posited between the ability to have that conversation and the ability to actually talk about the bill that was introduced and that we heard for 10 hours in the Judiciary Committee. This is not merely an amendment to the introduced bill. It is basically a substitute for the introduced bill. If you look on the bottom there, it says strike pages 4 through 29 and then the top half of page 30. That's the entire bill. That's the entire mechanism. That's the entire point. That's the entire multi-year bipartisan stakeholder process that brought us this legislation. So respectfully, I'm going to ask for a no vote on this amendment, and I'm going to ask that we in turn get back to discussing the bill as it's been introduced. We had 10 hours of testimony until nearly midnight on this bill in the Judiciary Committee, and I wanted to share a few things that were said by some of our witnesses on this subject. We heard from the Douglas County Sheriff, who said very plainly that the imminent danger bar is too high, and I do not believe that problem is sufficiently addressed by this amendment, much less as a substitute to the underlying mechanism, rather than merely an adjunct to it. We heard from a 44-year peace officer who's worked in multiple jurisdictions all over the state, who emphasized the requirement under an M1 hold that the person be gravely disabled. Again, there's that high bar. We heard from a district attorney in the metro area that the status quo is ineffective. We heard from another district attorney in the mountain area of our state who had an example of somebody who had been on an M1 hold for a short amount of time. And the problem with an M1 hold is it's brief. Sometimes people come right out and they're not stabilized and they do something horrible. And that's what happened in this case. We heard from somebody who had been the chair of the 2765 advisory board under 4 prior governors. 2765 is a mental health hold section here. That's exactly what we're talking about. He emphasized that mechanism is not effective to address the acts of violence that we're talking about. We heard from a man who works as a paramedic in Denver, who, by the way, was also an alum of Marjory Stoneman Douglas. He had a t-shirt on to that effect. One of the things we learned in this committee hearing was that over 11,000 alumni of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas have begun to mobilize and band together across the country to push for reforms, to push for measures that can keep what happened to their community from ever happening again. And he made a really interesting point. He said, every day I go to work, this body, us, the legislature, gives me the authority to take people against their will to treatment. He's talking about 2765. But it would be bizarre that this body would not grant first responders, such as myself, a paramedic, this other measure we're talking about here now in the introduced bill. So we will empower people to take away bodily liberty, to commence even a brief process, which, by the way, can lead to a more permanent process, of restraint of bodily liberty, but we will not put in place a carefully crafted measure to address possession of property that could potentially be used in a dangerous way. I think that's another interesting point about this, and then I'll leave off and we'll continue this conversation. But where there is a liberty concern, where there is a due process concern, why is taking the most fundamental thing you have, your bodily freedom, your freedom of movement, why is that better? Or as the amendment goes on, why is institution of criminal process better than a temporary, ordered, due process protected, counsel afforded mechanism that speaks not to bodily liberty, but merely to property? So members, I urge a no vote on the amendment. I'm glad there is interest in having a mental health conversation here. You heard my colleague from Denver say that there's even going to be an opportunity to join a version of that conversation at noon today. But we need to have the underlying conversation, so please vote no on the amendment.
Representative Humphrey.
Thank you, Chair Melton. So I rise in support of the amendment. I think this is important. I think the focus should be on mental health. That's the priority. I think that anytime you're going to take away someone's constitutional rights, you need to really be careful about the process that you go through. I understand that imminent danger is a high standard, and that's that for a reason. But maybe that needs to be addressed. So, you know, a substantial risk or you know, as in the bill, a significant risk might be something to talk about. But I think that if we were looking at an issue that had to do with taking away someone's you know, right to free speech or their right to vote, I think this body would be much more reluctant to move forward with a bill like this. So that's why that standard has been set that high in our state by previous General Assemblies. And I think that that's important for us to remember. So if we were to lower this standard to that level of just significant risk, I think with any other constitutional right, I really think that we'd be having a different conversation. So take a good look at this amendment, read it, consider it. This is the way that we should be dealing with these issues. We should be looking at this as a mental health issue and not right away, immediately going after someone's constitutional right in the way that we're doing in the underlying bill.
Madam, or Mr. Minority Leader, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know what? You're right. The word imminent is part of the problem. The word imminent is a big threshold to meet. We've heard that. I have constituents that have dealt with their family members and have told me that as well. So I move L042, which is an amendment to L030. Let's change the word imminent to significant risks, just like the bill. This would change the underlying substitute amendment so that we can actually give law enforcement the tools to get people to seek help, to actually give them the tools to put them in the 72-hour hold if they need to be. And we heard that the 72-hour hold is brief, but members, just last year, we passed a bill that actually gave more mental health options for people after a 72-hour hold is put in place. I think this amendment to the substitute amendment, together, they actually solve the problem, and we can actually agree on it. The word imminent is the problem. Let's do significant. I urge a yes vote on the amendment to the amendment.
And just to be clear, Amendment L042 has been moved and is properly displayed. Mr. Majority Leader. Oh, Representative Kraft, Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. Listen, the significant risk threshold is a really important one in 1177. The concern with lowering the threshold on the M1 hold is that you're going to just all of a sudden be taking more people into custody, taking away their liberty. And so, listen, we've talked at length about how the M1 hold doesn't work, but we have to start having a more comprehensive discussion in this body about limiting the stigma around mental illness. And I believe if you were to adopt this amendment to the amendment, you would actually just be increasing that stigma and taking more people into custody.
Representative Kraft-Tharp.
Thank you. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've worked in the mental health field for over 30 years. And since I've been coming here to the legislature, I've been working on mental health issues. And I have introduced bills into this legislature around the M1 holds, around the standards for M1 holds, around our mental health system. And in fact, in 2013, I passed legislation to develop the crisis system, which is supposed to be able to address a lot of these concerns. The M1 is not broken. The M1 is not broken. The M1 is a mental health hold that is doing what it needs to do. We have needs in our mental health system that we need to address. But legislators, we are the legislative body, and we don't change a standard for how we address people with mental health crises through an amendment on a bill. We're legislators. We need to work closely with the mental health field and the mental health professionals around the appropriate action, and we do this in a thoughtful, careful manner. And that is separate of what the underlying bill does. So we are off on this trail. I would encourage us, and our esteemed minority leader, let's partner. Let's partner and look at this in this next year around what the appropriate standard should be. But members, not through an amendment to legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And respectfully, we are legislators, and this is what we are actually doing right now is legislating. This is part of the process. Frankly, I was elected by my constituents who've shown me their concerns and their personal family experiences that show that the word imminent is the problem. This is part of the legislative process. And quite frankly, I would say the opposite. The underlying bill is going to add a lot more stigma to those seeking mental health. And I can speak to that from experience, from members that I served with in the Army that stopped seeking treatment when the VA was sending them letters saying they couldn't own firearms. I've got people that are afraid that their houses are going to be tossed. No-knock warrants are going to be issued on their homes when they don't even know what's happening, put their entire family in danger. That's going to create further stigma. This actually seeks to give law enforcement the tools to protect those individuals, to get them the help that they need. If this is a mental health issue, this is what we're getting at. This is the underlying issue. The word imminent is problematic. I urge a yes vote on the amendment to the amendment.
Representative Carver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, the core of the testimony that we heard in support of the red flag bill last year and this year was the view by law enforcement that they viewed the requirement of eminent as a barrier to action. We are offering this amendment to address that concern and to make it substantial risk. And in fact, if you go to the definition in current statute on when you pose a danger to self or others, you see that that standard uses substantial risk. So we are eliminating eminent. If that is a barrier to using this process, we are speaking to the main issue raised by the proponents of this bill on why the M1 process does not work. I urge support of the substitute amendment.
Representative Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I rise in opposition to this. Let's talk about the testimony. I've been here through all of the testimony from 2013 to the testimony we had just last week. I've been in room 271, sat in there for a lot longer than I sat in there the last time. And I can tell you, in the years since 2013, the testimony that I heard was not testimony of anger, was testimony of disappointment, because we were working against repeal of some common sense things that had been passed here in the legislature in 2013. When I sat there on the 21st and listened to team after team of people who came up, that was some of the most hopeful conversation and testimony I have ever had the pleasure to hear down here at the Capitol. And believe me, folks, I have heard a lot of it. And I heard all of it. I took 2 quick little bathroom breaks. The rest of the 10 hours, I was sitting there and I was watching and listening to what everybody had to say. And quite frankly, when we started our testimony, I remember Chairman Weissman came over to me and said, you know, Rep. Sullivan, are you ready to get started? I looked at my watch and it was 10:30, or it was 1:35, and I said, yeah, let's get this going. And we showed a quick video. And then House Majority Leader Garnett came up and gave his testimony, his quick opening, and then I gave an opening. And it lasted for 10 hours. Now, I'm pretty sure that if there was anybody within the state of Colorado who didn't appreciate what I had said or what Representative Garnett had said, they could have gotten in their cars from anywhere within the state of Colorado, driven to the steps, gotten out, walked inside, and they could have signed the sheet and they still could have testified. They could have brought up problems like we're seeing here that need to be taken care of. But that didn't happen, folks. People could have gotten on airplanes and flown here and come down and told us what the concerns were here. None of them said that. The populace, the people, the 87% of the Coloradans who are in support of this, they listened at home, and then when we were finished at 11:35, they went to bed with a hopefulness that we are going to do what we say we're going to do, and we're actually going to save some lives down here. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Bar none, I appreciate everything else we do here, trying to balance a budget and take care of all of the other problems that we have. But at the core of what we are, what the core of what I am, is Alex and Megan's dad. And I failed him that day because I didn't know what was out here and what he was to be in danger of. I know it now. That's why I'm here to tell you that we need to do something about this. We need to save some lives. Let's move this through and start on that as soon as we can.
Mr. Majority Leader. And I'll ask that that there's no applause or shows of sign of support on either side from the gallery. Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question, and the question is, I've heard it several terms: substantial risk, significant risk, imminent threat, imminent danger. What do these mean? How do we define these terms? I can get the sentiment of wanting to protect lives, but we have to write good policy. And we can't just push something through and punt something to our law enforcement agencies, our DAs, the courts. This body has an obligation to define substantial risk, significant risk, imminent threat, imminent danger. Until we define what these mean and use them appropriately, I don't see how we can go much further in this debate, because we can't just push something through and not have good policy. We were elected to represent the people, and we honor that by giving good policy. We don't wing it. We don't punt it to someone else to identify and define these terms. We have that responsibility, and I believe we need to spend time and identify, define what these terms are, and then pick the appropriate terms so that we're all on the same page. We're not even on the same page right now, ladies and gentlemen. Imminent risk, imminent threat, imminent danger, substantial risk, significant risk. What do these terms mean? We need to define what we're going to use in 1177 and in the amendments to 1177, and until we do that, we are punting to somebody else and not taking our responsibility as policymakers seriously.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Geithner. You know, it's pretty clearly laid out in the bill how you would use the judicial process, you would use the court, you would use evidentiary standards, and you would use evidence provided in that court to reach the significant risk standard. So it's pretty clearly laid out, and that's the process that is used commonly, and that is the process that we've outlined in 1177.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is not defined in statute. And so I think that we owe it to the...
But it's not used like that in the judicial process, right? You use a judge and evidence.
I think we owe it to the people of Colorado to define these and not punt. We have the requirement and the responsibility to make policy. And it starts with good definitions, not loosely open to interpretation. What does this mean? We need to define it, and I believe that's where we need to go from here.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Geithner. Let me see if I can articulate it a little bit more clearly. So the way that the process would work is you have to prove by, on the civil side, evidentiary standards, preponderance of the evidence in the temporary hearing, or clear and convincing on the full hearing. But again, we're on this amendment around the amending the substitute amendment, and so those processes aren't laid out in the amendment. So maybe when we get to the underlying bill, we can talk more about that.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think it's important that we define these terms now, because we're talking about ex parte. So it was just stated that it's not in the amendment. You're absolutely right. I think that we need to define it, because there is the ex parte piece in 1177, and until we do that, I don't think that we're honoring the rights of citizens. I don't think that we're honoring the rights of Coloradans that look to us to make good policy. I think we need to define these various terms, settle on one term, and make that term the term that we're going to use so that we're all on the same page. Instead of punting to the courts, instead of punting to DAs, instead of punting to local law enforcement, we have a proliferation of what this definition is, these various definitions, how it's applied, and in the realm of ex parte, I think that is a very significant piece that this body owes it to the people of Colorado to define and focus on so that we write good policy and not just push something through.
I'm going to remind the members that we are on the amendment to the substitute amendment. And so I want to make sure we don't meander back into the bill. Let's stick to the subject of the amendment. Representative Landgraf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend to be an expert on the bill. I would never claim to be more knowledgeable on mental health than Representative Kraftharp, but I do know this. A few years ago, we had a bill in committee. I believe it was Representative McCann's bill. It was mental health. The room was full of people, and the bill died, and it died because of the term, because of this term, imminent danger. It was Representative Kraftharp's bill, so she knows the bill. The bill died. A couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Dr. Fox, you all know him. He was the medical director. He came to my office and we were talking about, I was going to run a similar bill. And he said, the problem is this term right here, imminent danger. That until we fix the term imminent danger, which we're trying to do right now, I believe, that we can't do these things because imminent danger, the way the definition is, the way he described it to me, imminent danger, Representative Williams would be in imminent danger if I was holding a gun on him or a knife or a baseball bat. If I'm threatening him, that's not imminent danger. And so they can't do anything with me because he's not in imminent danger. So I strongly support this amendment. I think it's on the right track. Finally, we're getting somewhere, and I would encourage a yes vote on this particular amendment. And remember, Dr. Fox, he was kind of on your side, and I believe every word he said. So please vote yes.
Representative Sane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't need to remind this body, just for people listening in, the judicial branch interprets law. So it's our job to be very, very clear about the intent of what we're doing. And if there's questions now in this body, some of whom are attorneys, it's worth looking into. But I do want to mention on this amendment, we're simply referring back to the language that's currently in the bill, which is significant risk. Part of the confusion on this bill is just in the title itself, extreme risk. But that is not defined in the bill. It says significant risk. We need to be extremely careful about our terms, and that's what this amendment is trying to do. If imminent risk is not what we're looking for, well, let's do significant risk. And I support this amendment and the underlying amendment.
Seeing no further discussion on amendment, should be in the well. I need you in the well next time. Representative Soper.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't necessarily going to come down here, but I felt compelled. Sorry, this is a little bit low. Yeah, I rise in support of this amendment. One issue that I've had with the bill as a whole is that it conflates civil law with criminal law. And what this amendment does is it actually brings us in line with civil law. You see, imminent danger actually comes from the criminal side of law, whereas significant threat actually comes from the civil side of law. So it makes sense to adopt this amendment to have all our terms in line with the same side of law. So a significant risk of physical harm would be something that would be reasonably foreseeable. Whereas when you have imminent danger, that's a much higher standard. So actually, this really does improve the bill. Under the imminent danger doctrine, the existence of the condition or practice which could be reasonably expected to cause death or serious physical harm is an analysis that some states have gone on to define in statute. So as my good colleague spoke to earlier, we should have a definition in statute. We shouldn't allow the courts locally to have varying definitions of this term. So I would ask for a yes vote on this amendment. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion on Amendment L042, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. Amendment L042 is lost. To the underlying Amendment L030, Representative Ransom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support this amendment. We are talking about people that are having some type of crisis. That I think we've all agreed on, and the bill makes that clear, that if someone's in any type of crisis or that they are an imminent danger, that there needs to be action taken to protect that person and possibly those around them as well. We need to get these people help. And if you read this amendment, you will see that this amendment specifically addresses the issue that we're talking about as being the problem, i.e., get some help for the person that is in crisis. I submit that having a hearing without the respondent there and then showing up at their house potentially at 5 in the morning, which has happened and in other states, and potentially taking away some of their property and then leaving them alone in their home is not resolving the problem of somebody in crisis. If you are left alone in your home after it has been searched and potentially messed up, destroyed even, there might be pieces that are broken, art, things like that, and all of a sudden this person is left alone with no treatment and nobody helping them, then we are going to have problems with that person. And obviously what we're trying to do is help people in a mental health crisis. We are hearing all kinds of what ifs. We are hearing that if Mr. Reel had had this type of order served on him a few weeks earlier, that he would have probably complied, is what I'm hearing, and then maybe been happy afterwards and no longer had a crisis. Well, I submit to you that that is not what would have happened. We would have still had a man in crisis that would have had all kinds of other available methods to hurt people if that is what he wanted to do. He needed to have his mental health issues addressed. Depriving someone of their property as opposed to their personal freedom is still is a problem in and of itself. And if somebody is in a severe crisis, spiraling down, as our majority leader kept mentioning, he said this bill was going to help people that are spiraling down. Well, based on what I just said, this amendment actually does help people that are spiraling down out of control. We are trying to get them treatment and help and not a search of their home and having some of their property taken. One last point I just wanted to make is that we did hear that this bill had been worked very hard on and that it was perfect the way it is, that we don't need to have this amendment because the stakeholders all work together. And I have seen that happen over and over again in my years here. People have said, oh, he or she worked very hard on this bill, so we should pass it. Well, you know what? I'm going to say that working hard on a bill is not a good reason to vote yes. I think that we should vote yes on bills that are done properly, that are done well, that are good policy and good law. We are passing laws here, folks. We are writing statutes. We are not trying to resolve a specific problem that happened a couple of years ago. By the way, a couple of miles from my house. So I know that I keep hearing about this one specific incident. I actually did have a shelter-in-place order when I woke up that Sunday morning. I looked at my phone and I had a shelter-in-place order. So I recognize that that specific incident generated a lot of what we're dealing with now. That's not the point. We are writing laws that will be in effect for years. Again, I really think we need to treat people that have issues, that have mental health issues. This amendment does that, and I strongly urge an aye vote on this amendment that would truly help people that are spiraling down and in a crisis.
Representative Sane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I rise in support of this amendment. Our colleague from Aurora said earlier that he was confused. Why is this amendment that we're discussing now on the mental hold better than the bill? Well, let me ask a question. Is receiving due process as a Coloradoan American better than not receiving due process? That is the question. This amendment offers due process. It offers an opportunity to really save lives if we think that somebody is going to commit suicide or harm another human being without destroying their lives, because mentally ill people deserve due process too. And as had been mentioned earlier, sometimes people are just having a really bad day, and they don't deserve to have their church, their boss, their neighbors, their coworkers, and everybody informed that they've had their firearms taken away because of an extreme risk protection order. Let's address the real problem, because that's what we're supposed to do down here, is address the real problem. And if we want to save lives, this amendment will help us do that. If somebody truly is threatening suicide or harm to somebody else, this will help us do that. Because as we've heard from many experts, and there's many studies across the nation, including those states that have these laws, people who are intent on harming themselves or others will find another method for doing so. I'll just remind you that a man doesn't need a gun to kill a woman. He can use his hands. He can use many things. But if we want to prevent death, we won't simply take away a firearm. He has so many other options to choose. I also remind you of the flip side of this as well. There is not enough protections in this bill for people who are falsely accused. This amendment will also help with that. I just received an email from a Vietnam veteran who said that his neighbors reported him to the police because he killed babies in Vietnam. He said to me, "I was a medic in Vietnam, I saved babies." But my HMA members did not like it when I disagreed with them on something. And I just want to remind you that police can also issue this. Had they reported him to the police for something he had said, they would have knocked on his door and informed his neighbors, his coworkers, his boss, third parties, that he just had his weapons taken away from him because of an emergency risk protection order. So this particular amendment is so important, and the reason why we're addressing this so strongly today is because it will protect the innocent, and it will help the people who truly need help, because that is the real problem. I'll urge an aye vote, and I hope you will consider giving this amendment a favorable consideration.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, this amendment's all about essentially criminalizing and stigmatizing the mentally ill. And we know that the M1 holds aren't working, and that we know that it's not working because people who are struggling with violent and suicidal ideation are individuals who quickly shift from being stable to being unstable to stable in a short amount of time. But we know that the data and the research show that just a small percent of violence is associated with serious mental illness alone. So what this amendment is essentially doing is, for the mentally ill, we are going to essentially take your liberty. We are going to, essentially say that you can be arrested. We're going to put you in an M1 hold that we're all talking about isn't working. You're going to be dropped off, and then when you quickly move out of that situation where you were unstable and now you're stable again, you're going to enter that same very dangerous situation. So the reason that Mental Health Colorado supports the underlying bill, and that the reason I would urge a no vote on this amendment, is because the underlying bill looks at risk factors, not a health diagnosis. And it looks at a range of issues that may lead someone to harming themselves or others. So I understand the intent of the amendment, but again, I would urge a no vote.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I respectfully disagree. This amendment doesn't criminalize anyone. It actually outlines a process where they can have due process. Look, I know in my district, the largest Medicaid provider for mental health services in my district is completely against the underlying bill because of what it will do to stigmatize those actually seeking mental health treatments. This actually outlines a process where those folks who might actually be a threat can get some evaluation, get some help, and maintain their due process instead of having their homes no-knock raided, having their houses searched. This will actually save lives by getting people treatment that need treatment. Without this amendment, the underlying bill is going to cost lives because more people are going to be put into dangerous situations. More people are going to be stigmatized for not receiving stigmatized against receiving treatment because they're going to be worried about what's going to happen. This amendment is a true solution to this problem and does not criminalize anything.
Representative Herod.
Thank you, Representative Melton. And I won't speak to the bill at this time, but I do want to clarify a point. There is no knock warrants or raids in this bill. I think it's important that we speak to the facts. There's been a lot of misinformation that has gone on about this bill that is factually inaccurate. We heard that in committee, and I want to clarify this is not a no-knock raid bill. I ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I can appreciate the bill sponsor. Taking this on, I appreciate that. I've had the opportunity to work with Majority Leader Garnett before. I haven't had the opportunity to work with you yet, Representative Sullivan. One of these days, who knows? So the question is, how important is due process? How important is due process? Rep. Sullivan, when you were making your speech up here, you said something about 87% of Colorado approves of what this is all about. Is that correct? And what survey was that where we came up with the 87%? I'm one of those rare birds that sits back here and listens to these debates, so some of those things strike me. So where did that 87% come from?
Representative Sullivan.
Was it the recent survey that said 79%? Or was it the Magellan one that said 60% of all Republicans are in favor of this one? Either of those.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Representative Sullivan, did that survey include Fremont County and Custer County?
Representative Sullivan.
I did not say to you that I'm the one who did the survey. All I'm doing is reading off of what the numbers were.
Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Sullivan. I appreciate that because, you know, those of you that have been here a while know I vote my conscience first, my constituents second, and my caucus third. Here's what my constituents are saying about this, if you haven't seen the news. Fremont County and Custer County have declared their counties by resolution a Second Amendment sanctuary county because of the violation of due process and Second Amendment.
Representative Wilson, can you return back to the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is to the amendment because we're talking about due process and whether or not it's an issue. And I'm telling you, when we're coming together here and debating and talking about what effect this is going to have on the state of Colorado, I can tell you 50% of my counties say that due process is important, so important that the commissioners have gone on record, KRDO TV and the newspapers, that they are sanctuary counties because it's such an issue of due process and Second Amendment. So as we debate this issue, folks, don't underestimate that the rural counties do not agree with this. And in my time here in this chamber, this is the first time I've seen two of my counties go on record on something as emotional as this. So as we talk about 60% or 87% or whatever, I want you to know when I'm speaking, half of my counties have already gone on record. Thank you.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Minority Leader Neville for bringing this strike below amendment. And I frankly wish that this bill had been a standalone bill in its original form. I don't think anyone in this body, as was alluded to earlier by the Majority Leader, does not think that mental health is a serious issue. I do, however, take exception to the Minority Leader's or the Majority Leader's portrayal of this amendment as having a violation of due process. In fact, I think this gets better at that due process. For me, I'm very concerned about the underlying bill's establishment of separate evidentiary standards. I'm also very concerned that we are now essentially creating a situation where someone who has been charged with no crime, somebody who has not committed a crime, will now have law enforcement not only come and confiscate property, but notify members of their community and stigmatize them, which I think could have the very real unintended consequence of further stigmatizing them, further driving them into mental health crisis, and indeed causing further violence that might not have happened otherwise. I encourage you to all take a serious look at this strike below amendment, because I think that this honors the idea that we have due process protections. This is not criminalizing anybody who has not committed a crime, but this is acknowledging and giving a way for loved ones and people who are close to individuals to notify law enforcement, and while respecting their rights, getting them the help that they need. I think this is a very reasonable compromise. I think it would be unfortunate for this body not to give it due consideration, because I do think that, you know, whatever the intentions of the underlying bill may be, I do think that there are serious issues when it gets to due process. We've seen functionally similar legislation in other states opposed by the ACLU. I encourage you all to read the ACLU of Rhode Island's, the Republican bastion of Rhode Island. I encourage you all to read their opinion of their extreme risk protection order bill and their opposition. They lay out very clearly their due process concerns, that we are essentially creating a category of thought crime that does not exist in statute, should never exist in statute. Protecting lives is indeed a very important thing that we should always be looking to do in this body, but we have to respect due process and rights. Nobody wants to live in a society where people who have not committed crimes will be stigmatized, thrown in jail, subject to property confiscation. And I think, unfortunately, this could be the very first step toward going toward that. like I said, I strongly encourage us to give due consideration to this strike below. I very strongly urge a yes on this amendment because I think that this is honoring the intent of what we're trying to get at here while also protecting due process. Thank you.
Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just need to clarify the record on the last point. Whatever bills have been debated in Rhode Island, I think is of limited relevance here, and whatever positions, organizations, the ACLU or otherwise in Rhode Island have taken, I think is of limited relevance here. The ACLU of Colorado has made very plain in writing in black and white, and I will show to anybody here who's interested that they are neutral on 1177, which is the bill before us. ACLU of Colorado is neutral on the bill. Thank you.
Representative Liston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I rise in support of this amendment, L030. I believe in the adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and I think that's what this amendment is attempting to do. Before we take the dramatic, draconian step of, coming in and seizing people's firearms, somebody who has a mental issue, I think this amendment addresses the concerns that we all talk about. Let's get to the root of the problem. If the person has a serious mental issue, which they probably do, then let's get them the proper counseling that they need and that they deserve. Otherwise, what is going to occur under the present form of 1177, the authorities are going to come in and take people's firearms and leave that person who is obviously may have some mental issues alone and angry and fuming. They've just, quite frankly, inadvertently, they've lit a fuse for a person to stew and fume and do a slow burn, or in some cases a fast burn, that is going to accelerate them taking drastic action. Don't think for a second, people, colleagues, that people out today, because of the publicity that this bill is getting, I can virtually guarantee that there are good men and women out there who own firearms that are not mentally ill, quite frankly, far from it, but they're, because of the publicity that this bill is getting, I guarantee you that they're already out there hiding firearms, either on their property or elsewhere, to prevent having their firearms taken. They may only hide 1 or 2 guns. Some people are probably hiding multiple firearms. So if a situation does arise where they're reported and they come in and the authorities come in and take their firearms, they're going to have firearms hidden, and it could lead to further drastic. So the unintended consequence of this bill is going to encourage people to go out and safeguard their firearms, which probably many people have already done. And I would also remind, as heinous as a firearm fatality is here in down in our neck of the woods in Colorado Springs, or technically in Teller County, there was a brutal murder, and it was committed on Thanksgiving Day to, unfortunately, Kelsey Barrett, where her husband beat her to death with a baseball bat. And Lord knows what he's done with the body, burn it, and the authorities right now. So there is unfortunately more than one way to savagely kill somebody. So with all due respect, I would urge an aye vote on this amendment. I think it's commonsensical, and let's give it a fair shot. Thank you.
Mr. Assistant Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And members, you may not care to listen to me. I don't believe the representative from Arapahoe County is listening. So perhaps we can quote from a few sheriffs who testified at the Judiciary Committee, major sheriffs from some of the biggest counties in Colorado. One says this, quote, "This bill does not address the underlying mental health issues. It assumes if a person poses a significant danger to themselves and others, and their firearms are removed from them, they are no longer a threat to themselves or others." To quote the sheriff, "This is naive and a dangerous misperception that does not address the cause of the order. These restraining orders do not require a person to seek help, counseling, or any other assistance. This simply requires them to surrender their firearms." This amendment addresses the underlying issue that is the root cause of the order. To quote another sheriff from a major county here in Colorado, "There is no doubt," this is a quote, "there is no doubt a mental health crisis in our country. There is a mental health crisis in our country, but this bill does absolutely nothing to help address mental health services, and it is instead a gun control bill loosely disguised as a mental health bill." This sheriff went on to ask and closed his testimony by asking the members of the committee to please focus on, quote, "the real yet daunting process of mental health treatment reform." This bill does just that. I urge a yes vote.
Representative Sane. Oh, Representative Beckman, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment. I think it aligns with some of our other statutes where civil liberties are at question. I like this amendment because you have a household member, which is in the bill, a spouse, a girlfriend, an ex-lover, that can file an affidavit, but then you have law enforcement that gets involved. You have an interview process. And then in the conclusion, if there is help needed, you have wraparound services provided, very much like you would in child welfare cases, where you would have a police come to a house or a phone call made to Human Services, and you would have a social worker come out and do an investigation. If wraparound services are needed, it's called differential response. And they wrap around services so that the children can stay in their home. This is a really good process that looks at risk factors like we might with other mental health issues or child welfare, because it's a pretty serious situation when you are, maybe it's not a no-knock raid, but you are, it's ex parte, coming to the house and taking items, or even when, child welfare would make sure that children were safe and take them away from the home. This is a process to start the evaluation, to have another person conduct an interview, to have professionals come and discuss and decide if there actually is a need for a mental health evaluation, something a little bit more than an angry spouse or someone on the phone to a judge. This is actually trying to deal with the problem with respect and care and a process without taking away the liberties, searching houses without warrants, taking possessions because a girlfriend or an ex-wife is upset. This amendment would actually do some good. Maybe it doesn't make quite the political statement, but it does really help those that need some mental health treatment. We spend a lot of money on mental health in the state of Colorado. Our services are pretty fractured. Maybe for those dollars, we should demand more. Because when we're talking about, I guess it's not no-knock, but we're not talking about no-knock rates, but we're talking about going to someone's house and going through their possessions and taking their possessions because someone said that they had a mental issue. Maybe we could, to protect our First, our Second, our Fourth Amendment rights of the Constitution and the Colorado Constitution, we can talk about that later, maybe we could hold those organizations that are getting hundreds of millions of dollars to do mental health evaluations really accountable to come and help us with this. We have something that we've talked about for years and we funded for years. It's not working. Well, there's a problem there. Who's managing the programs? This is a very high-risk area. We need to ask that those that we fund be available to come and do these interviews and to make sure that we can do mental health holds. This is a great amendment, and I want to thank Minority Leader Neville for bringing it. It really solves the problem in a way that I think is responsible to the citizens of Colorado, that protects people and also protects our constitutional rights.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I certainly have appreciated the debate on this amendment. And the more time I spend with it, the more concerned I am with the amount of risk that is actually involved in this amendment. And so let me sort of explain why. We spent a lot of time on the underlying bill, and I assume when we get there, we can talk about how we're trying to sort of minimize risk to the law enforcement officer or agency that would be moving forward on an extreme risk protection order. My concern with this amendment is that if you look at how high the threshold must be, right, that the respondent must be in imminent danger of suffering personal injury. So that is essentially a incredibly high standard, or death at the hands of the respondent, or that the respondent is in imminent danger of causing injury or death to self or others. So we're literally talking about the highest level. This person who would meet this threshold would be in full-blown crisis. Somebody would be in a full-blown mental break in order to reach this threshold. And upon receiving an affidavit that somebody has hit this threshold, we are going to ask our law enforcement officers, and I'm not saying this was the intent, this is just how I'm reading the amendment. And so I'm not trying to impugn anyone's motives or anything like that, but this is my concern. That it's such a high threshold that you are then going to ask law enforcement to go and conduct an interview with that person at that highest level of threat. So we are asking our law enforcement officers to go and conduct an interview, and they shall formally seek a mental health hold. That interview seems to me like it could be a very, very dangerous situation with somebody who has hit this threshold, which is clearly the highest threshold that I have seen articulated in statute. And so that's another reason why I believe we need to vote no on L030.
Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. I had a little humor there sitting on the bench because when you raise your hand to get to speak, our esteemed chair is giving everyone three fingers. So I'm not sure if we're playing third base or we're third on the bench or what, but we all got three. So I came this morning, up here this morning to talk about this amendment, and I'd like to thank Minority Leader Neville for bringing it, and I'll tell you why. I was at the Governor's Forum 2 days ago. That's where I was in the afternoon. I had to get out of committee so I could go, and of course, I went to go talk conservation easements, but while I was there, I got pulled aside by Dr. Hickman of Centennial Health. They were having a mental health forum that day, the Governor's Forum. They were having a mental health forum about the concerns they have on mental health here in Colorado. And the mental health crisis that we have is real. We all know that. We've heard it over and over again. And whenever you look at the demographics of Colorado, 20% of Coloradans live in the rural areas, whereas that rural area is 80% of Colorado. And when you start talking about mental health and you're talking about suicides, almost twice as many suicides in the rural areas. So I support this amendment because it brings us back to where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be thinking about how we can get mental health evaluation Emergency mental health evaluation is what this amendment is talking about. So for the rural areas, this amendment is very important. And I can tell you that those suicides that I have witnessed through my lifetime haven't all been with guns. Had a really good friend, took care of himself in the barn with a rope. Had another really good friend take care of themselves with a pickup on a creek bank. Suicide is real. This amendment, I'm so thankful, because it is mental health. People from my part of the world need. I probably know 15 people my age. 15. Just my age. Not the young people, not the older people, just 15 my age that have taken their lives. In rural Colorado, that 80%, that vast area, that 80% of Colorado, vast area, we deal with drought, blizzards, down markets, dead cattle, bankers that don't want to talk to us anymore. We fight government that wants our land. Government wants control of our land, and they do it in various ways. And while I was sitting at this mental health crisis seminar that the governor put on, I realized one thing. And that one thing that I realized, doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, as long as you're working for something, you have a goal, whether it's to buy a little piece of land or a new house, and you and your spouse, your family, maybe you're a widow, wants to pay that off. You have something to achieve. You keep working towards it. But once you realize that's no longer your goal, and you can't achieve it, that's when things go bad. That's when we have an emergency mental health crisis. And that's why we're here today. The people in rural Colorado are struggling. I brought this up at the SMART hearing. I commend our Commissioner Vag, Commissioner Brown, our past commissioner, who is working with Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, Colorado Farm Bureau in mental health crisis. They're going around giving out cards with numbers on them for people to call. Because most people that are ranchers or farmers, doesn't matter whether they're male or female, they're not going to call Dr. Hickman. They're going to go talk to their feed salesman, maybe their extension agent. They're going to go talk to someone that to get it off their chest that they're hurting. So I commend those groups for doing this. It's real, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Let's pass this amendment. Let's add it to this bill. I urge an aye vote. Thank you for your time.
Representative Pelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Lewis and I represent almost the whole Eastern Plains. We have unique situations out there. I happen to have had a nephew commit suicide out there. Guns aren't the problem. We are talking about mental health issues. That is the problem. Guns, vehicles, baseball bats are just the tool. We need to be very, very careful when we are talking about rights given to us by our God. We need to be very careful. So almost every sheriff and county commission in my district right now are working on resolutions to become Second Amendment sanctuary counties. This is an urban and a rural divide in this bill. I would think we really need to be careful where we go. So due process is another big reason they are going to move forward with these resolutions, and this amendment would speak to that. So I would urge a yes vote on this amendment.
Representative Lontine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as we are on the subject of suicide, I thought it would be appropriate to read the following testimony from Lauren Snyder, who testified in the committee last week, and she represents Mental Health Colorado. We strongly support House Bill 1177 to create an extreme risk protection order that would allow members or law enforcement to petition the court for a temporary removal of firearms from anyone posing a danger to themselves or others. These types of laws have been effective in other states as a prevention mechanism for suicide, with 13 states passing ERPO laws as of January 2019. And since this committee hearing, New York has become the 14th to pass a similar law. Data suggests there is a clear need for an evidence-based prevention strategy in Colorado, such as an ERPO. CDC data state that, as of 2017, Colorado has the 10th highest rate of suicide in the nation. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, biological, physiological, social, and environmental factors can increase a person's risk for suicide. Suicide is never the result of one cause, rather a combination of risk factors coming together, often in the context of stress and with access to lethal means, such as a firearm. According to the Colorado Health Institute, and these are figures from the state of Colorado, in 2017, 1 in every 2 suicides involved a firearm. Thank you.
Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, members, it's getting a little bit difficult not to be a little cynical up here when we're hearing opposition to this amendment because of the word imminent when we just had that debate and had a different solution. So if your opposition to this amendment is based on the word imminent, is there any other words? The fact of the matter is, individuals can find all sorts of tools to harm people. I look at my school itself. Because they used the wrong plastic alarm clock, there were 2 propane tanks that didn't go off in the basement of Columbine High School. Those propane tanks would have done a heck of a lot more damage than even the guns did in there. They used pipe bombs. Let's look at some other circumstances. Look at the damage that Timothy McVeigh did with a truck and some fertilizer. Right now in the state of Colorado, we don't have a proper process to initiate these M1 holds. If you take a look at some of the other circumstances across the country, a lot of circumstances, those individuals were ignored and didn't get the help they need. This amendment attempts to do that. I say again, and I plead with you, if the word imminent is the problem, we had a solution that we debated earlier. That was defeated. It was actually spoken against. What is the correct word? Or are we only looking at guns, the tool? Is that the only solution we can find here? Can we actually find a solution to give people the mental health treatment that they need?
Representative Sane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just heard some things during this discussion. I felt like I needed to say something. So we heard the majority leader say mental health holds don't work. Well, again, back to addressing the problem, why don't we work together to make sure they do? Here we are halfway through the session, and obviously this is an important topic to remove people from danger, but we're not willing to discuss this amendment seriously. Earlier, the Assistant Minority Leader read a statement from a sheriff. He said that this is loosely guised as a mental health bill, but does not address mental health. That's my sheriff, by the way. That's Weld County Sheriff Steve Reams, who has been very vocal in his opposition not only this year, but the year before. Which brings me to another point. We talked about protecting the innocent, and we talked about protecting people that actually had mental health issues. But we haven't talked about a third victim yet, and that could be the police officers themselves. Now, I don't know the answer to this question, but I've been asking over the last hour. I haven't received an answer yet, but we will find this answer. But I'm willing to bet if somebody is served with a mental hold, I bet you they do it with a knock. But even if they don't, let's just say that no knock warrants are provided to take people into custody for mental holds. This version of the bill with this amendment would still be better for our officers, and let me tell you why. Because right now, those folks that may be on the edge, or veterans who are very much afraid you're going to take their guns away, if somebody's on the edge and this bill passes in its current form without this amendment, those counties that do serve no-knock warrants, those officers can be in great danger. We have an instance, one of my colleagues from Aurora was talking earlier, and there was an incident in Aurora not that long ago where a veteran, an elderly veteran, was protecting his home, heard screams from the bedroom next door. His 11-year-old son was screaming because an intruder broke in and was trying to kill him. The intruder attacked Mr. Black, and he fought back and shot the intruder in the chest. Now, what happens next is a gentleman with a hearing disability who had just defended his home is shot dead by police, was shot dead by an officer who has been in a shooting incident before. I don't know at this time if they did identify themselves or not as police. But I'm willing to bet Mr. Black did not know who they are in the dead of night after he just shot an intruder trying to kill him and his son. That's an instance that we can see repeated. The bill as it is written without this amendment could also put our officers in great danger. And I think we should take the opportunity to pass this amendment, work on mental holds if they are not sufficient, and maybe we should also do some more training for our police officers. We're going to have to if this bill passes in its current form. Another representative, a colleague from Denver, said that she wanted an evidence-based law, that Mental Health Colorado wanted an evidence-based law, and it's interesting because there was discussion earlier about imminent danger and how high of a threshold that is. Well, I just want to point out, and this is to the amendment, Mr. Chair, but I just want to point out that somebody can serve one of these extreme risk protection orders with a preponderance of evidence. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a 50% threshold. But more interesting, if we're talking about evidence-based law, is for the person the respondent that this is served to, has to prove the negative. And they actually have a higher standard, which is clear and convincing evidence to prove they are not a danger to themselves or others. That is completely backwards. So I support this amendment the way it is written because it should be the highest threshold to begin with. Back to my sheriff. Back to my sheriff saying that this is not a mental health bill. I'm grateful for my colleague from Denver who happened to mention we need to take away firearms because they could be used for suicide, and just kept saying firearms over and over. It makes it pretty obvious that this bill is all about taking away guns, because otherwise my colleague would have mentioned ropes, drugs, knives, scissors, because when my sheriff, actually, I don't think he will, because I think we're going to be a Second Amendment county as well pretty soon. But when these police officers come into these homes and toss that home to look for firearms, they probably should be taking those things as well. But we don't address that. This is why a mental hold is so, so, so important. If somebody actually really is going to meet the threshold of imminent danger, then we need to remove them and put them in a place where they can receive that help, not kill themselves with something else that happens to be there. We need to get them real help. In addition to that, the current law provides if they are evaluated and they are indeed a continuing danger, there's 3 months more of treatment. What would that do for somebody that's intent on shooting up a school or a theater or something else? If it's not working, let's fix it. We want it fixed. What happened to my colleague over here, I hope nobody has to go through. But we need to preserve due process for the rest of Coloradans. We should not overturn hundreds of years worth of law that works because we haven't addressed an underlying issue in this body. And apparently we refuse to. How is that fair to anyone, including those who are mentally ill? The answer is it's not. It's not. And it wasn't fair, and it won't be fair to our officers either. Our officers have a higher rate of suicide than the regular population, higher rate of divorce. I don't know if you knew that or not. It's very difficult to do the job that they have to do. To have to call somebody and say that your son was involved in the shooting, to say that your daughter won't come home because somebody decided to take an extra 2 shots and drive drunk. These are things that we don't have to do on a daily basis and put our lives on the line. This is going to make it that much harder for our officers to help us, help the people that need help. So I'll rise again in support of this amendment. It's really that important, and that's why we're talking and hoping that this body will address the real issue. And we have that opportunity right now. So I hope you will take it. Thank you.
Representative Herod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, we need to stick to the facts. This bill does not provide for or allow for no-knock raids. It was acknowledged by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and we must continue to acknowledge that. When we put out information, we are doing exactly what my colleague who just spoke to me beforehand. We are creating that environment because we are not presenting factual information to the people of Colorado and to our constituents. This bill is not about no-knock raids. But when we talk about things like suicide. It is also important that we stick to the facts. In Colorado alone, in 2014, there were 527 deaths, suicide deaths, that resulted from the use of a firearm. In 2015, there were 541 suicide deaths by firearm. In 2016, there were 605 suicide deaths by firearm. And in 2017, 591. That is the real statistics for Colorado. We have to stick to the facts when we're debating this bill. My colleagues brought up their sheriffs and the conversation from law enforcement whether or not this amendment will be better for law enforcement who have struggled and who are placing themselves in harm's way every single day. I want to read a brief statement from Sheriff Joe Pelley. In Colorado, we have laws, we have tools that give us the ability to restrict access and sales of firearms to people who have been convicted of certain crimes, like felonies and domestic violence. We have the tools to restrict access to firearms for people who have restraining orders against them, particularly for issues like domestic violence. But we have no tool, no legal means to restrict access to a firearm or sale of a firearm from someone who is in acute behavioral health crisis and is at risk to themselves or other people. Sheriff Pelley supports this bill. We do not support the underlying amendment. I want to read a brief statement from Sheriff Tony Spurlock. Sheriff Tony Spurlock says, in committee, we know for a fact that if we can remove a gun from someone who is mentally ill and is thinking about suicide, that the chances of them, if we remove that gun, the chances of them committing suicide is drastically reduced. That is a fact. Why wouldn't we do that, says Sheriff Tony Spurlock. This bill is about saving lives. So when we stick to the facts, members, we realize that, as the majority leader said, this amendment creates a lot more concerns and can do a lot more damage to those who are putting themselves in harm's way. We must stick to the facts of what is really happening here in Colorado today, not just in Denver, not just in Arapahoe County, yes, in rural Colorado and throughout our state and our country. Members, this amendment erodes at the core of what we're trying to do here with this bill. I ask for a no vote on this amendment, and I ask for a yes on this bill.
Okay, members, I just want to remind you of the hour. I still have 3 members signed up to speak, but just want to remind members of the hour. Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think we've heard from 2 different folks regarding the imminent danger in the interview process and how that actually puts our law enforcement at more risk. Allow me to share with you a personal story of my best friend who was at that point of imminent danger. You see, he called me to give me what he deemed his farewell tour, and I was the final call that he made. In the course of that conversation, he revealed that all hope was lost. He had deployed 3 times, and that it was in the best interest of him, his friends, his family, that he not be with us anymore. So in the course of this dialogue, while I'm trying to wrap my brain around the reality of what I'm actually experiencing on the phone, and he's not in Colorado, he's in another state, so here I am roughly, I think, 2,000 miles away, trying to process all this. I'm talking to my wife, and I'm snapping and I'm calling her over. And it becomes apparent to us that we need to try and get some sort of help as fast as we can to him. So we knew where he lived. We called the local law enforcement agency that was there, and we requested what they call a health and wellness visit. They can lead into something else. They knocked on his door. We heard the knock, actually, while we were on the phone, and my wife and I are handing off phones, trying to keep him on the phone and work law enforcement to get him there. He puts the phone down. He didn't hang up. He was like, hold on. For whatever reason, thank God he was distracted. He answered the door, and there was an interview between that law enforcement officer and him. The interview deemed that he was at an immediate danger to himself, and they instituted a 72-hour hold, and he was eventually brought to the VA hospital there, local, and he got the help that he needed, and he's still alive today. He was at the imminent danger point. They didn't take his gun. They got him the help that he needed. You see, if they had come in and they had taken the gun, I guarantee you he would not be here today. He would find another avenue because he was at that point where all hope was lost. This amendment does exactly what I saw in practice. It did not put the law enforcement agent at more risk. It removed the individual from this environment where he could use any element at his disposal to cause harm to himself. This amendment works. I've seen it in practice firsthand. I urge a yes on this amendment. It does not pose additional risk to our law enforcement agencies. It helps the individual who's at that imminent danger point get the help that they need. I urge a yes.
Representative Soper.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also rise in support of the amendment. I actually preferred the amendment with the amendment to the amendment, which added substantial risk in place of imminent danger. But I still like the amendment, and I'll tell you why. I'd like to contrast it to the bill without the amendment. So with the amendment, what ends up happening is you can have law enforcement visit the home based on an affidavit, which is similar to what the bill does without the amendment. They ask the individual, the respondent, a few clarifying questions to greatly understand what their mental level is. And at that point in time, they might leave with the person in custody and be able to seek the 72-hour hold. At no point in time are they going through removing firearms that may or may not be the respondent's. It could be the respondent's spouse. It could be the respondent's children's. They're taking the individual out of a dangerous situation and removing them from being a risk to themselves or others. And if our law enforcement officials or other officials had determined that that individual was a risk, why would you just leave with their firearms? They're probably still going to be a risk. Let's compare that to the bill without the amendment, where it's the same affidavit process. They're given a certain amount of time to comply after being served notice. Failure to comply will definitely yield law enforcement coming to that individual respondent's house. What they're going to have with them is a search and seizure warrant. It may or may not be a no-knock raid, but what we do know is that they will come for failure to comply with the initial civil notice, asking, very forcefully, to come in to the premises and to search for any firearms and remove those firearms. Under the bill, without the amendment, the individual remains on the premises. I don't know about you, but we've just created a highly toxic situation. If the person had been deemed to be a risk in the near future to themselves or others, they failed to comply with the notice. Then law enforcement removes any firearms. We have an individual that is not only mentally off, let's say, but we also have an individual who's probably ticked off because they just lost property, and property that they deem to be a right under the Second Amendment and under Colorado's Constitution. Now, under this scenario, it's not over. Because the underlying hearing for the notice was ex parte, the respondent didn't have the opportunity to face their accuser, as the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution allows. So law enforcement has left that individual respondent very upset and guessing who had accused them. I don't know about you, but if a person has been deemed to be a risk to themselves or others, and we've just removed their property, and we've left them on their premises, they're going to be very, very upset. You can fill in additional adjectives. I'll refrain from this position here. And I guarantee you we'll have a few, not all, but a few individuals that will probably hunt down to seek revenge on the person they believe filled out that affidavit. Whether or not the affidavit was true or not. It could have been entirely true, but they're going to just be incredibly angry. Now, was our law enforcement safe under this scenario? Probably, because they left with firearms. But we created probably the worst situation I can envision for Colorado. And that's where we have an individual who thought they were doing the right thing by filing an affidavit, either through the personal process or through law enforcement, to get the ERPO. And we've still left the individual out in society to either seek revenge or to do harm to themselves. That's why this amendment is a very good amendment. If the person really is that troubled, that much of a risk, we should remove the person, not necessarily leave them there angered than they were before. So I'd ask you to politely consider this and vote yes on this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Singh.
Colleagues, since we're taking this opportunity to discuss mental illness, I want to bring up another option to maybe help this discussion, especially as we move forward, regardless if this particular amendment is passed or not. When I look at mental holds on our issue brief, it says a 72 mental hold can be initiated by an intervening professional, including a certified police officer, medical professional, registered professional nurse with training in psychiatric or mental health nursing, licensed marriage, family therapist, counselor with training in mental health, licensed clinical social worker, and additionally, affirmed before a judge by a concerned relative or friend. There is something missing from that. And I want to tell you a story. I'm working on a suicide prevention bill this session, and a pastor in my area is helping me do that. She told me a story that raised the hair on the back of my neck, and if it's something that I haven't heard yet, you probably haven't either. At a youth worship service a couple days before Columbine, the two young men who shot up that school walked in the door, and she saw them. And the worship leader just stopped the music all of a sudden, and he said, "A spirit of murder has walked in this room. And I ask you, God doesn't want you to do this." They walked back out. Now, would she have known at that time that she needed to initiate a mental hold? Probably not. But I think one thing that we can do in this process of talking about mental health is let's add to this list and make it explicit. The pastors and clergymen and priests are welcome in that process. Because oftentimes they will tell their pastor something they will not tell their family. They will not tell their wife or husband, will not tell their neighbor, boss, or coworker. Let's invite the spiritual into this, because it is important, and make sure that they have that training. Because I'm willing to bet that's a single point of entry where we can probably prevent most suicides and others harming others, is including the Black Robe Regiment, our pastors and priests and clergymen on that front line. So, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make that point as we're discussing this particular amendment and how important that really is, because we are missing something. The majority leader's right. We're missing something when it comes to mental holds. And we can stop this discussion we're having now and go work on it together. If that's the will of this body and the majority, and I invite you to do that.
Seeing no further discussion on Amendment L030, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The noes have it. Amendment L030 is lost. To the underlying amendment, Amendment L016. Mr. Majority Leader.
I would urge an aye vote on L016.
Seeing no further Representative Sane. Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the passage of Amendment L016. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The ayes have it. Amendment L016 is passed. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee rise, report progress, and beg leave to sit again at the conclusion of the Public Health Committee that will meet right after this.
You have heard the motion. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the committee will rise, report progress, and sit again after the Health Committee has completed its work.
And there will be a call to House members once they're done. Thank you.
Members of the Public Health Committee, we will see you down in our normal committee room in 5 minutes, otherwise known as 12:22 p.m., to hear our calendared bills. In 5 minutes, 12:22 p.m., we will see you down in our normal committee room. And for the rest of the members, you'll feel free to join us as well, and then you'll see how quickly we get done. I would plan on about an hour, give or take a few minutes, either way.
House will come back to order. Mr. Randall.
Madam Speaker, your committee of the whole reports as follows. It has risen reports progress and begs leave to sit again today at the conclusion of the Public Health Committee.
So I don't really know. Okay, Assistant Majority Leader Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the House stand in recess until later today.
There being no objection, the House will be in recess until later today.